everyone, and welcome to today's presentation. Mr. Mohinder here to take you through another lesson as I help you get prepared for S.E.A. In today's lesson, we are going to take a look at creative ways to begin stories. Please visit our online learning platforms, learn.moe.gov.tt, and the Ministry of Education's website, moe.gov.tt, and our social media sites for more episodes and other resources as we help you get prepared. Let's begin today's presentation by taking a look at a read aloud. Follow attentively as I read. I remember it like it was yesterday. That day my life changed forever. Metallic blue and silver balloons and a string of LED lights decorated the backyard in celebration of my golden birthday. I closed my eyes and smiled as I made my wish. I could hear my family and friends singing happy birthday. In the background, I could smell my dad's barbecue on the grill, competing with the scent of melting wax. "Well, aren't you going to blow out the candles?" asked my cousin Aruna. I took a deep breath, eyes still closed, and I blew, as everyone erupted into cheers. Was my wish really going to come true? I wondered as I opened my eyes. In the corner of my eyes, I spotted my dad approaching. I stood rooted with shock to the cool, grassy ground. My heart raced. My smile brought a river of salty tears that streamed down my cheeks. "Here, son, happy birthday," he said as he gave it to me. I grabbed it and hugged it with trembling hands. My wish had come true. Did that introduction leave you in suspense? Did it leave you wondering, well, what was this present that this child got that had him so emotional that he began to cry? Was it the thing that he really wanted? Well, in today's episode, I'm going to share with you ways that you could write introductions just like these that would leave your readers in a sense of suspense, wondering what's going to happen next, making them want to read on with more of your story. Let's explore introducing your story in creative ways. The introduction of your story should be exciting, interesting, inviting, or intriguing. If it is stimulating and thrilling, it will hook and captivate your reader's attention. You really want to hook your reader's attention from the beginning of your story. Once you do that, they will continue reading your story because it's interesting and they would want to find out what's going to happen next. And those are the kinds of stories that you want to produce. Your introduction presents the background, the characters, setting, and some conflict. It should arouse curiosity in the reader, and it gives the reader incentive to continue to read on more. A well-written introduction is one that captivates the mind of the reader, promises excitement, is witty but not too complex. Well, how can you do this? Well, we could try some of these. We can appeal to the senses of your reader, appeal to his or her emotions, be descriptive but not too lengthy, create a sense of suspense. Always ask yourself, when you are writing stories, would I want to read the story that I have written? Try to spot the points in the story that appeal to the senses, appeal to the emotions, are vivid but not lengthy descriptions. Create a sense of suspense. Follow along as I read the story aloud for you again. I remember it like it was yesterday. That day, my life changed forever. Metallic blue and silver balloons and a string of LED lights decorated the backyard in celebration of my golden birthday. I closed my eyes and smiled as I made my wish. I could hear my family and friends singing happy birthday. In the background, I could smell my dad's barbecue on the grill, competing with the scent of melting wax. "Well, aren't you going to blow out the candles?" asked my cousin Aruna. I took a deep breath, eyes still closed, and I blew, as everyone erupted into cheers. Was my wish really going to come true? I wondered as I opened my eyes. In the corner of my eyes, I spotted my dad approaching. I stood rooted with shock to the cool, grassy ground. My heart raced. My smile brought a river of salty tears that streamed down my cheeks. "Here, son, happy birthday," he said as he gave it to me. I grabbed and hugged it with trembling hands. My wish had come true. Remember, we're looking for points in the story that appeal to the senses, appeal to the emotions. We are looking for descriptions that are vivid but not too lengthy. And we are looking for things that create a sense of suspense that would want to make the reader continue reading our story. So let's take a look at the things that appeal to the senses. So we'll begin by taking a look at the things in the story, in this introduction, that appeal to the sense of sight. The writer spoke of silver and metallic blue balloons and LED lights that were strung along the backyard. He also appealed to the sense of taste when he spoke of the salty tears. Normally, this would not be something that appeals to a sense of taste, but because of the way that it's used in the story, a river of salty tears streamed down my cheeks. One could well imagine the tears going into the writer's mouth or the character's mouth so that they would be able to taste the tears, which were salty. The appeal to the sense of hearing, and this was done through the singing of the song Happy Birthday as the person in the story cut the cake. And, well, very clear in the story was the appeal to the sense of smell, through the smell of the barbecuing and the burning wax. The barbecue being food that was being cooked, and the burning wax being the melted candles that were on the cake. And lastly, there was appeal to the sense of touch, through the use of adjectives to describe the ground, the cool, grassy ground. In a very simple way, the writer was able to appeal to all 5 senses without being too lengthy and very intricately weaving them into the story to enhance the way that the introduction is presented. This is what you want to do. Sometimes it's not possible to appeal to all 5 senses. But remember, you are writing a story, and for your reader to be in the shoes of the person in the story or to experience the events that are unfolding in the story, you need to appeal to as much or as many of the senses as possible so that the reader will be able to experience the things that are being experienced by the characters in your story. Let's take a look now at the ways that the writer was able to appeal to the emotions of the reader while reading the introduction. We saw a sense of happiness and excitement being created through the celebration of the birthday. There was also a feeling of joy or euphoria, which was brought out through the adjectives used to describe the emotions when the main character in the story received his gift. The author was able to use words and descriptions that appeal to the emotions of the reader. By doing this, it would have brought back memories, or it would have placed the reader in a situation similar to where the character in the story was receiving the gift. So it would have appealed to their emotions and make them want to read on to continue to find out what's going to happen next, or what was this present that the child got in the story. Let's take a look now at the descriptions that were used in the story. The setting. The writer spoke of the blue and silver LED balloons, the lights, the backyard, and we know from reading the story that the backyard has grass. The people present. The writer spoke of the characters, the family, friends, the father, and we were even introduced to the cousin of the writer in the story. And we were also introduced to the activities that were taking place, singing, cake cutting, and cooking. We also saw how the main character felt: happy, excited, hopeful, ecstatic. So in a nutshell, the writer was able to bring across these things in a very clear, concise manner, using very simple yet vivid words to describe what's happening in the story. This is what you need to do when you write your introductions. You need to be very clear and concise in your descriptions. You need to describe exactly what's taking place, but not be too lengthy as to bore your reader so that they would not want to continue reading. Let's take a look now at the ways that the writer was able to create a sense of suspense in the story. So, after reading the story, I'm sure that you are wondering, what did the main character get? What made him so happy that he cried? Did his wish come true? I am sure that after reading this introduction, you are left telling yourself, I want to know, I must read on, where's the rest of the story? When you write your stories, this is exactly how you want your readers to feel, so that they would want to continue reading your story. It makes no sense writing a story where persons stop reading it after the first few lines. For them to be able to want to continue reading on your stories, one of the most important things that you must do from the very beginning is to create a sense of suspense that leaves them asking these questions so that they would want to continue reading on to find out what happens next. So let's take a review of all that we have looked at so far. We have seen that your narrative must have an introduction that holds your reader's attention and makes him or her want to read more. You can do this by appealing to his or her senses, appealing to his or her emotions, writing vivid descriptions, and by creating a sense of suspense. Stay tuned, we'll be right back after this short break. Welcome back. Remember, in our lesson today, we are looking at creative ways to introduce your story. Let's recap what we've learned so far. So far, we've learned that a narrative should have an introduction that holds the reader's attention and wants them want to read more of your story. This is done by appealing to the senses, the emotions of the readers, by presenting clear and vivid descriptions, and by creating a sense of suspense in your story that makes the reader want to read on to continue to find out what's going to happen next. Earlier in today's lesson, we took a look at an introduction. Let's take a look at another introduction, and we are going to compare this to the one that we saw earlier on. Once upon a time, there lived a little boy whose name was Mark. He lived in a town called Busyville. The town was full of busy people. His family was also a busy one. Their home was always busy. The school he went to was called Busy Children Primary School. Remember, I told you that we were going to take a look at this introduction and compare it to the one that we saw earlier on. In the previous segment of our lesson, we would have learned that for an introduction to hold and captivate your reader and want to continue reading on your story, that you must appeal to the emotions and to the senses of the reader through vivid descriptions and by creating a sense of suspense. So let me ask you this question. Does this introduction hold your attention and make you want to read more of it? Let's take another look and examine it to see if it struck the points that I mentioned earlier on. Once upon a time, there lived a little boy whose name was Mark. He lived in a town called Busyville. The town was full of busy people. His family was also a very busy one. Their home was always busy. The school he went to was called Busy Children Primary School. So, I'm pretty sure that after reading that you all are feeling as bored as I am right now. This story has very little appeal to the emotions and to the senses of the reader, and the descriptions are very limited and lacking. There's also very little suspense, and there's very little in this introduction that really entices the reader to want to continue to read your story. So let me ask you, does this introduction appeal to your senses and emotions? Most likely, your answer would be no. In this introduction, there's very little appeal to the senses and to the emotions. Was this full of bright, vivid descriptions? Not really. The only description that we saw was the use of the adjective busy. Busy was used throughout the introduction to describe the boy, his family, the school, and even the town that he lived in. In fact, one would say that the word busy was quite overdone in the story. Is there a sense of suspense and mystery? And the answer to this again is no. There was no suspense or mystery. There was nothing that would really beckon the reader to continue reading on the story to find out what's going to happen next. Already we know that there's a little boy who lives in a town that's very busy, that's always busy. He's a busy child, his family are busy people, and the people who live in the town are always busy. I certainly would not want to continue reading on this story because I've already found out most of what I need to know. In a nutshell, this introduction lacks any of the things that would make a reader want to continue reading on to find out what's going to happen next in the story. Well-written introductions have clearly constructed sentences and hypnotizing phrases, arouse the reader's interest and beckon them to continue reading. This is where those things that your teachers would have taught you in class come in. This is where you use them to help you enhance your writing to create well-written pieces that make your readers want to continue reading your story. In the past, it was quite popular to use once upon a time to begin a story, but now it's become quite cliche and boring, and it's very unappealing to any reader to want to continue reading a story. It sounds more like a fairy tale, or when you use it, your story sounds like a story that you've written for a very small child who would read these stories that begin with once upon a time. Let's continue by looking at the same piece and how we could improve what we've written. Do you remember the writing process? Let's do some editing and revising of our draft. Let's make it better. Remember, when we revise and edit, we take out unnecessary information, we add details that are missing, We move around sentences, we reconfigure them. We create complex sentences by joining or simple sentences using conjunctions. And of course, we vary the types of sentences that are used in a story. We also check the spelling and the grammar usage in a story as well. So we are going to apply these things to our introduction to make it better. So we'll take out the once upon a time, we'll move around some stuff, and we'll add in some stuff to our introduction to make it a bit more appealing to the reader. Let's take a look at this revised and edited version that I have created. Now, I know that some of you would have your ideas. So let me encourage you to take a look at the introduction again. Probably you can look at it at our online learning platform. And you can pause the screen, you can have a look at it, and you could look at ways that you could improve it or make it better. But this is the version that I was able to come up with. Faster, Mark, we don't want to be late, urged Chrissy. It was the one night everyone in Busyville looked forward to yearly, the night of the big celebration. Mark had everything a child would want: a wonderful, loving family, good friends, a pet dog, and he went to a busy little school called Busytown Primary School. Just like everyone in his town, he too was always busy. The town never stopped working. Everyone was always hard at work except for this one day of the year. Just as they reached the park, a cool, crisp gust of December wind dashed over the northern range and flooded the valley. The scent of freshly brewed cocoa tea tingled their noses as Mark and Chrissy entered the park. Suddenly, there was a bright flash, and the few seconds of darkness that followed was interrupted by a loud bang. Everyone stood still. So, I'm pretty sure that you are asking yourself, what caused this bang? Why did it go to the park? And what's going to happen next? Well, this is exactly what you want to happen when you write your introduction. Look at how we were able to make our introduction from earlier on better by using the writing process that we would have learned in school, by adding in some information, by using those phrases, similes, metaphors, and other literary devices to help enhance our work, and by appealing to the senses of the reader. We were able to create a sense of suspense and mystery that what makes the reader want to continue reading the story to find out what's going to happen next. This is exactly what you need to do when you are writing a story. So perhaps the first time you write a story or an introduction and you read it, you might think, well, this is boring and uninteresting. This would not work. But all is not lost, and there's no need to discard what you have written as we have done here. You can simply make it better by employing the writing process that you would have learned in the classroom with your teacher. So after reading this introduction, did you think there's no place on earth where people are so busy? Why don't they sleep? What are they doing all the time? What celebration are they having? Where is this town? What was the flash and sound, lightning, thunder, a blown electrical transformer, an alien attack? I'm pretty sure that you are wondering all of these things right now. And this is exactly what you need to do, or where you need to leave your reader at the end of your first paragraph, because you want them to continue reading on your story. Your interest is aroused. You want to find out the answers to these questions. And wait for it. Bingo, the stories are reading. Anyone reading this introduction would want to continue reading on the story to find out what's going to happen next. Don't you agree? Let's recap what we've learned so far in this segment. So far, we've learned that we can use exciting and descriptive language that creates a sense of suspense and mystery to encourage our reader to want to continue reading our story. We can add details, descriptions, and some appeal to the senses. And when we do this, we employ the editing and revising stage of our writing process that we would have learned in class. So now that you have learned how you can improve your draft introductions to make them better and not discard them altogether, let's take a break, and we'll be right back as we continue today's lesson. back. Thank you for staying with me. Remember, in today's lesson, we're looking at introducing our stories in creative ways. So far, we've learned that the beginning of our story sets the tone for everything that will follow. When you start to write a story, you might not always know where it is heading, and your plan will change along the way. Your introduction of your story is an opener that is like a tasty bite of what is to come next. Let's explore some different ways or strategies that you could use to begin your story. We can begin our stories or narratives by using dialogue and or action. We can ask questions of the reader. We can describe the setting. We can begin with background information about the main character. Or the events that are taking place in the story. We can allow the main character to introduce himself or herself in the story. And lastly, we could use the flashback techniques. There are many other techniques that can be used to begin stories, but we are going to focus on these 6 today in our presentation. Let's have a look at technique 1, using action or dialogue to begin our story. Dialogue is an effective story starter to hold the reader's attention. It introduces characters, it reveals tone, setting, and the action. It can create and maintain a sense of suspense in your story, and it creates intrigue to encourage the reader to want to read more. Think about it. If someone is having a conversation, naturally, we would want to listen in on that conversation to find out what's the story being told or what's going to happen next. When you use dialogue to begin your story, this is exactly what you do. You intrigue your reader with conversation to make them want to continue reading on to find out what's going to happen next. Let's consider this prompt. One day you realize you have superhuman powers. Write a story about your discovery and what eventually happened. Additionally, we are given these scaffolds to work with. Remember, scaffolds are skeletons that help you to prop up or to propagate your story. These are the points that you need to touch on and develop in your story as your story continues. How you made the discovery, what you did eventually, and your feelings and emotions during your experience. Remember, by appealing to the feelings and emotions of the reader through the characters in the story, you put them in the shoes of the character and you make them feel what's happened in the story so that they would want to continue reading the story to find out what's going to happen next. What you do by appealing to the feelings and emotions is to take the reader on a roller coaster of emotions. That way, they become enveloped and engulfed in the story. They are part of the story, so naturally, they want to read on to find out what's going to happen next. So let's look at how we could use dialogue to begin our story. Remember, we are writing a story about one day you realize you have superhuman powers. Write a story about your discovery and what eventually happened. The starter bellowed. On your marks, get set, go. The starting gun boomed. I launched myself forward, trying desperately to spring ahead of the pack. The crowd chanted, "Go, Jaron, go! Go, Jaron, go!" Suddenly, I realized I was no longer on the ground. The crowd in the stadium looked like a nest of ants around a fallen lollipop. Let's examine our introduction to see where the writer used dialogue and action to introduce us to the events that were about to unfold in the story. We see the use of dialogue at these 2 points in our story. In the beginning, where the starter was speaking and he said, "On your marks, get set, go." And we also see the use of dialogue where the crowd was chanting and encouraging Jaron to run by saying, "Go, Jaron, go." Action is also used in the story when the writer spoke of propelling himself forward to try and get ahead of the pack. And the crowd in the stadium that looked like a nest of ants that had surrounded a lollipop. Look at how the writer was able to use dialogue and action to hook and captivate the reader, to make them want to find out what's going to happen next in the story. Why was Jaron in the air if he was running a race? How did he reach up in the sky? Why was he looking down at the crowd? I'm pretty sure that you are wondering all of these things. And this is what you need to do when you use dialogue and action to begin your story. Remember, when you are using dialogue, to use your punctuation marks correctly. If you need to review your use of punctuation marks, please visit our online learning platform, learn.moe.govtt, where you will find a lesson to help you improve your punctuation as well as other resources. Let's take a look at Technique 2. In Technique 2, if you remember, we begin our story by asking a question or asking questions of the reader. Remember, these questions that you are asking of your readers must be thought-provoking. That creates a sense of mystery and intrigue in the minds of your reader. That would want them to continue reading your story to find out exactly where the story is going or what is going to unfold or what's going to happen next. Let's consider our prompt again. One day you realize you have superhuman powers. Write a story about your discovery and what eventually happened. You may include details about how you made the discovery, what you did eventually, your feelings and emotions during your experience. Let's take a look now at how we could use Technique 2 using questions to begin our narrative. Let's have a read. Have you ever wished you could fly? What would you do if one day you realized you had superhuman powers? How would you use your powers to benefit mankind? My discovery came the day of the zonal track and field games. The entire stadium roared with excitement as the finals of the boys' relay was about to start. At the sound of the starter's whistle, I bolted like a bullet from my position towards the second position, fueled by a cheering home crowd. I glanced down only to realize I was looking at what seemed to be ants. In this introduction, using Technique 2, the writer asked questions of the reader related to the plot which were meant to entice them. The questions posed were: have you ever wished you could fly? What would you do if one day you realized you had superhuman powers? How would you use your powers to benefit mankind? By reading this, the reader can tell the stories about someone who one day discovered he had superpowers, which were used to benefit mankind in some way. This makes the reader want to continue reading to find out exactly how these superpowers were used. Remember, when using questions to begin your story, they must be thought-provoking and related to the story you are about to write. When you use questions to begin your story, you want to create a sense of suspense or mystery, or you want to probe the minds of the reader so that they would ask themselves these questions and continue reading your story to find out what's going to happen next. Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short break and we'll continue with today's lesson. Welcome back. Thank you for staying with me. Remember, in today's lesson, we're looking at creative ways to begin our story. In this segment, we are looking at different techniques that we can use to begin our story. So far, we've looked at using dialogue and action to begin our story, and we've looked at another technique, asking questions of the reader. We are going to continue now by taking a look at Technique 3, describing the setting of our story. One of the most common ways to begin your story is by describing the setting. Remember, the setting is when and where the story is taking place. Therefore, your description of the setting will allow the reader to imagine from your words where the story is taking place. The reader isn't there, but you can put him or her there by using your words to describe exactly what's taking place. Your setting should have some appeal to sensory details as well, but not too much to overpower your plot. Remember to try and appeal to as many of the senses as possible using descriptive words. Let's take another look at our prompt. One day, you realize you have superhuman powers. Write a story about your discovery and what eventually happened. You may include details about how you made the discovery, what you did eventually, your feelings and emotions during your experience. Let's take a look now at how we could use Technique 3 using settings to begin our story. A thunderous Cheer erupted in the stadium. The field was filled with the aroma of freshly cut grass. The sun was already high in the sky, and its rays felt like thousands of tiny arrows piercing my exposed skin. I took my position, and at the sound of the starter's whistle, I was off, my feet moving at lightning speed. I soon realized I was no longer in the stadium, but among the clouds. Here, the writer begins the story by describing the setting. We know from reading this that the events are unfolding in a stadium and it's around midday. So we have a fair idea of where the story is taking place and the time the story is taking place. To tell us this, there was an appeal to the sense of smell through the use of the adjectives to describe the grass as being freshly cut. There was an appeal to the sense of hearing. We saw the crowd was cheering and the starter blew his whistle. And there was also an appeal to the sense of touch when the runner felt the hot sun. And there was appeal to the sense of sight when he saw the clouds and the filled stadium as he was looking down. The writer gives us enough details for us to imagine what's taking place, but not too much details to bore the reader. To be used effectively, there must be a balance, just the right amount of what to make the reader want to continue reading the story. Using this technique, the writer was able to give us enough details for us to imagine what's taking place, but not too much details to bore the reader or to make reading the story become overbearing. Remember, when using this technique for it to be effective, there must be just the right balance, the right amount of descriptions, and the use of literary devices to make your reader want to continue reading your story to find out what's going to happen next. You must use your words carefully to craft that sense of mystery and suspense, to beckon your reader out, to tell them, hey, continue reading my story. Good things are about to happen here. Let's take a look now at Technique 4. If you remember correctly from the beginning, with Technique 4, we present background information about what's taking place in the story to create that sense of mystery and entice the reader to want to continue reading the story to find out what's going to happen. In this technique, the writer gives us information about the characters or events that are about to take place. This information is meant to grab our interest and make us want to continue reading the story. So let's have another look at our prompt. One day, you realize you have superhuman powers. Write a story about your discovery and what eventually happened. You may include details about how you made the discovery, what you did eventually, your feelings and emotions during your experience. Let's see how we can use Technique 4 to begin our story, the same story that we've been using throughout this part of the lesson. After 3 rounds of competition, the big day was finally here. Everyone was at the Atto Bolden Stadium. It was the day of the zonal track and field finals. It was the time for the final race, the boys relay, and I was chosen to run the first leg. Calmly, I took my place at the starting position, and on the sound of the starter's whistle, I was off. I soon realized that I was no longer in the stadium, but high amongst the clouds. Here, using this technique, the writer began by telling us some information about what had transpired or taken place before that led him to be in the place where he was at present, the stadium. That is, he began by telling us where he was, why he was there, and what was taking place. It's a simple yet gripping way to begin our story. If you were the reader reading this story, wouldn't you want to continue to read on to find out what happened to the kid who discovered he had superpowers while running a race? When you present background information to your reader while they're at the beginning of the story, you create a sense of mystery and suspense in the mind of your reader so that they naturally want to continue reading your story to find out what's going to happen next. Remember, the information that you present must be linked in some way to the plot or to the events that are about to unfold in your story. Let's take a look now at the other technique, Technique 5. Having the main character introduce himself or herself in the story. When we use this technique to begin our story, the main character tells us a bit about himself at the beginning of the story. The information presented must be enough to tell us what to expect, but not too much to give away all the details of the plot. Remember, you want to give just enough so that you pique or entice the curiosity of the reader so that they would want to continue reading your story. Let's consider our prompt once again. Remember, the prompt we're using today is, one day you realize you have superhuman powers. Write a story about your discovery and what eventually happened. You may include details about how you made the discovery, what you did eventually, and your feelings and emotions during your experience. Let's look at how we can use technique 5, having the main character introduce himself or herself to begin our story. My name is Jaron Alexander, a regular 11-year-old with black curly hair and brown eyes. Even though I'm the tiniest boy in my Standard 5 class, I'm the star runner for my school. I'm a pretty regular kid, except for one tiny secret, and this is my story. So after reading this introduction, I'm pretty sure that you are thinking, well, what's the secret that Jaron had? Or what is he about to tell me? He's a regular child, just like myself in Standard 5, probably preparing for S.E.A as well, and he has a secret. What's the secret? These are the kinds of questions that you want to leave your reader asking after they read your introduction that you create using technique 5, presented, having the main character introduce himself or herself so that they would want to continue reading your story. Wouldn't you like to find out Jaron's secret? When you use technique 5, having the main character introduce himself or herself, these are the kinds of questions or the kind of suspense that you want to create in the mind of the reader so that the reader would want to continue reading your story to find out what's going to happen next. Let's take a look now at our final technique, technique 6. Technique 6 is using the flashback to begin our story. A flashback is an interjected scene that takes the narrative back in time from the current point in the story. Flashbacks are often used to recount events that happened before the story's main sequence of events to fill in crucial backstory. To break it down, quite simply put, a flashback is when you remember something that would have taken place at an earlier point in the story at the present time, at the beginning of the story. Let's see how we could use our prompt to begin our story using the flashback technique. Remember, our prompt we're using today is, one day you realize you have superhuman powers. Write a story about your discovery and what eventually happened. You may include details about how you made the discovery, what you did eventually, and your feelings and emotions during your experience. Let's have a look at how we can use the flashback technique to begin our story. That morning, I woke up knowing because of my actions, the world was a better place. It all began. So, using the flashback, we're able to recall events that would have taken place before at the present time being the morning. Naturally, any person reading this introduction would want to continue reading to find out what began, what happened, what led the writer to wake up in the morning at this point in time. Another way that we can use the flashback to begin our story is by simply saying, I remember it like it was yesterday. That day, my running ability transformed into a superpower. I swore I would always use my magical powers for the benefit of mankind. So this is a simple alternative way to use the flashback technique to begin our story. In both beginnings, the writer used the flashback where he remembered something that had happened in the past. By doing this, he draws the reader into the story so as to find out what happens next. Remember, when we use the flashback technique to begin our story, we recall events that would have happened at some previous time or in the past at the present time in our story. That way, we intrigue the mind of the reader, creates a sense of suspense as they naturally want to read on to find out what's going to happen next in the story. What happened that was so significant in the life of this character that he's now remembering it, and it's unfolding in his head as if it had just recently happened. Just a word of caution, when using the flashback technique, if it's not used correctly, it can sometimes confuse your reader as to what's taking place in the story. So just be cautious when using the flashback. Ensure that you plan correctly when you are doing your planning so that when you begin your story, you don't confuse your reader, but instead you create a sense of suspense and mystery so that they would want to continue reading the story. That brings me to the end of the techniques that we can use to begin our story. Stay tuned, we'll be right back after this short break with a recap of all that we've learned today. Welcome back. Let's take a recap of all that we have looked at in today's lesson. Remember, in our lesson today, we are looking at creative ways to introduce our story. We learned that a narrative must have an introduction that holds a reader's attention and makes him want to continue to read our story. You can do this by appealing to the senses of the reader, creating a sense of suspense, and appealing to your reader's emotions. When you appeal to the senses, you create a sense of suspense, or you appeal to the emotions of the reader. You put the reader into your story. You make them a part of your story so that they want to continue reading to find out what's going to happen. You can do this by not being boring or cliche. Try to use phrases or words that are not overdone or overused. You want to leave unanswered questions so the reader will continue reading your story. Most importantly, you need to ask yourself, would I want to continue reading this story? Remember as well that you need to use clear, vivid descriptions so that your reader is able to see, feel, hear, touch, smell, and even taste what's taking place in your story, so that they feel a part of the story, so that they want to continue reading on. We also looked at 6 techniques that you can use to begin your story. These were beginning with dialogue and or action, asking a question, describing the setting, giving background information, having the main character introduce himself, or using the flashback technique to begin the story. We also learned that we can use our editing and revising skills to make our introductions better. Remember, your introduction, sometimes your first draft might need some work. Don't discard what you have written. You can use editing and revising to enhance it, to make it better, so that it becomes appealing and creates a sense of mystery, so that anyone reading your story would want to continue reading on to find out what's going to happen next. I hope that you were able to see this throughout the lesson, where the same prompt was used for all 6 techniques. Remember, all the materials used in today's presentation, as well as additional material, can be found on the School Learning Management System, or SLMS, at learn.moe.gov.tt and the Ministry of Education's website, moe.gov.tt, as well as our social media platforms. These will help you get prepared to write S.E.A. Thank you again for joining me for today's lesson. I do hope that you found today's lessons enjoyable and informative. Please join us again for another episode in our series S.E.A Time, as we help you get prepared for S.E.A.